Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly fascinating subject, but we're actually going to completely skip the wild speculation. Instead, we're impartially examining the documented, physical, and technological impacts of unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs, by looking strictly at the data. We'll be breaking down intense eyewitness testimony from a highly secure military zone and then cross-referencing it with 50 years of rigorously filtered aviation reports. Ultimately, our goal here is to understand exactly what happens to our physical environment and our technology when these phenomena are present.
So let's dive right in. When we talk about UAPs, the conversation kind of tends to drift into the abstract, right? Blurry photos, vague stories, but what happens when one actually touches down? What is the physical footprint? To answer this, we're going to look at a pretty remarkable testimony from a South Korean soldier stationed at literally one of the most heavily monitored borders in the entire world, the DMZ. Starting with this highly detailed first-hand ground encounter from 1982 is really going to anchor our understanding.
Back in May 1982, South Korean soldier Bae Song-duk was on duty when he and his unit observed something absolutely incredible. Something massive had actually landed in the grass near their heavily fortified outpost. He described this immense silver craft, noting it had a width of about 20 meters, which is over 60 feet, by the way, and the height of a 3-story apartment building. The description is super specific. It looked like 2 stacked bowls with a rectangular, window-like center. We aren't talking about a fleeting, blurry light in the sky here. This was a massive, tangible, metallic object sitting absolutely stationary right there in the brush.
Let's trace exactly how this afternoon encounter rapidly escalated. The craft was first spotted just sitting in the grass around 1:30 p.m., and it just sat there, completely silver, for hours. But then, around 5 p.m., everything changed. The craft began to glow with this brilliant, flashing green light. It lifted off, slowly moved directly toward the soldier's observation post, and then hovered about 20 meters above a machine gun bunker. It stayed there silently for about 30 seconds, emitting a sound identical to the electric whir of a modern EV. And then, in less than a single second, it shot 15 kilometers across the valley. It demonstrated instant acceleration, zigzagging across the sky, stopping on a dime and moving diagonally, before totally disappearing.
Now, what's truly fascinating about this event is the stark contrast between the localized physical effects on the ground versus what happens up in the air. While the craft hovered just 20 meters overhead, Bae Song-duk noted that he felt absolutely zero heat and experienced zero electromagnetic interference. However, it definitely left a profound physical trace. The following spring, when the snow melted, the grass in the exact 20-meter circle where the craft had landed simply refused to grow. Dead grass. So we have a clear physical footprint, but no immediate electronic failure on the ground. But, as we're about to see, when similar crafts encounter airplanes mid-flight, the technological effects are drastically different.
Section 1. UAPs and Aircraft Systems. To understand these airborne effects, we're going to shift from our micro case study to a macro-level view using a massive 2001 technical report from NARCAP, the National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomena. They analyzed over 50 years of pilot sightings involving alleged electromagnetic effects. But here's the thing, the scientists behind the study didn't just take every wild report at face value. They used a rigorous scientific filter called EMCARM. Basically, this system scored the data based on pilot experience, number of witnesses, separation distance, and the severity of the malfunction. Out of 1,300 total reports, 57 involved these effects, and by applying that strict filter, they narrowed the evidence down to 27 highly credible, top-tier cases. When we dig into these 27 highly vetted cases, we see a really fascinating breakdown of exactly who was experiencing these mid-air anomalies. Private aircraft accounted for 11 cases, military had 10, and commercial flights had 6. What this reveals is that private general aviation aircraft actually experienced a disproportionately larger percentage of electromagnetic effects compared to military and commercial planes. Why does that matter? Well, the researchers theorize this might be because military aircraft are often heavily shielded against external radiation and deliberate electromagnetic jamming, whereas your standard private planes are pretty much entirely exposed.
So, the crucial takeaway here? When an aircraft got close to a UAP, its electrical systems were overwhelmingly the most vulnerable to interference. Across the data, fundamental electrical systems were affected in 40 instances. In stark contrast, physical power plants, like the actual engines themselves, were affected only 4 times, and onboard radar was independently jammed or affected just 4 times.
40 distinct instances. We aren't just talking about a cabin light flickering once. This is a massive recurring pattern of profound electrical disruption happening across decades, across totally different continents, and across multiple types of aircraft.
And out of those 40 electrical failures, pilot radio systems failed or suffered severe static interference 15 times. That makes them the most frequently affected subsystem of all. This is, honestly, incredibly serious for flight safety. Pilots reported complete communication blackouts, intense static, and totally dead frequencies that isolated them in the air. And the crazy part? The radios only resolved themselves once the mysterious craft flew away.
Even more alarming, especially for navigation, there were 10 specific cases where the aircraft's magnetic compass system completely malfunctioned. Imagine flying an airplane and suddenly your primary navigational instrument just begins spinning wildly or locks completely onto the wrong heading, right as an unidentified object pulls alongside your wind.
To make sure this was a strictly data-driven analysis, the researchers actually created a rigorous, multi-level taxonomy. They used it to classify exactly which hardware failed. They tracked whether an altimeter had an erroneous readout, if a compass precessed slowly or rotated continuously, or if an engine sputtered versus failing completely. This incredible level of granularity proves that the electromagnetic symptoms were not just random glitches. They were specific, targeted interactions with the aircraft's avionics.
Section 2, Proximity and Maneuverability.
Think about it. If these effects were just random internal aircraft glitches, distance to a UAP wouldn't matter at all, right? But mapping the data reveals a fascinating correlation. Proximity is everything. The vast majority of these temporary system failures occurred only when the UAP was in very close proximity to the aircraft. Out of the cases where distance was known, 16 occurred when the craft was under 3,000 feet away. 11 cases happened under 1,000 feet. And incredibly, 5 cases occurred when the object was under 100 feet from the plane. Crucially, in 89% of these cases, the electromagnetic effects were entirely transient, meaning the instruments failed only during the closest approach and then immediately returned to normal function the exact second the UAP departed.
It's not just distance. Position matters too. The data shows that the highest number of electromagnetic effects, 10 specific cases to be exact, occurred when the craft was flying directly alongside the airplane. Another 4 cases happened when it was directly in front, and 2 cases occurred while the UAP was actively circling the airplane. The craft were deliberately pacing these planes, matching their speeds, which are often between 100 and 250 miles per hour, while bathing them in some kind of highly disruptive field. This leads us to a truly striking pattern. Researchers found a direct correlation between the position of the UAP and the deviation of the magnetic compass. Pilots actually reported their magnetic compass needles physically deviating to follow the exact position of the UAP outside their window. If the craft moved from the left wing to the right wing, the compass needle swung to track it. This heavily suggests that these unidentified aerial phenomena generate an intense, highly localized magnetic field that is capable of completely overpowering the Earth's own magnetic poles right inside the cockpit.
Section 3, Connecting the Evidence.
So by connecting those grounded physical traces at the DMZ to this massive pile of aviation data, a really impartial, data-driven picture of the phenomenon emerges. We aren't looking at optical illusions or weather anomalies here. Whether it's a perfectly barren 20-meter circle of dead grass that refuses to grow at a landing site, or aircraft instruments vibrating violently in the sky as a compass spins wildly out of control, the physical reality of these encounters is thoroughly and rigorously documented. In one unbelievable aviation case, a light plane came within 18 feet of a UAP, causing the entire aircraft to vibrate violently and enter an uncontrolled dive while its directional gyroscope rotated 180 degrees. The physical forces at play here are literally immense. Based on all this rigorous statistical analysis of avionics failures and first-hand testimony of physical landing sites, we are left with a pretty profound question. If these crafts can instantly accelerate to 15 kilometers a second in total silence while simultaneously generating magnetic fields strong enough to blind aircraft radios and hijack compass needles, what do you think this data implies about the undiscovered physics behind these phenomena? Keep that in mind as you continue to explore this incredible topic. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.